Before we get started, I would like to issue a checkpoint spoiler warning for the anime-only crowd of Dandadan. At some point in the video, I will dive into content for Dandadan that will not be in this season in relation to the topic of discussion. With that in mind, if you are an anime-only and would like to remain that way for the foreseeable future, please click off this video at the timestamp shown below in order to protect your enjoyment. It's important that I do not spoil some of you all if I can help it, and if you find yourself leaving the video a bit early, then by all means, make sure to leave a comment down below on your thoughts from where you stopped. Otherwise, thanks for watching and enjoy. I want you all to think about your favorite series right now, and once you do that, I want you to think about what is that series' heartbeat. What is that element or narrative choice that extends itself to every corner of the series as if it were the story's blood itself? Perhaps it's the tactical nature of team combat that leaves no room for excuses, or maybe it's something that captures the best aspects of the human heart both heroically and competitively. Every series has that something that truly defines the story on a wider narrative scale, and that something tends to be what pulls people in for the long term. No matter how many times we may see that said aspect displayed among different series, execution is what matters, and when good writing is met halfway with a good adaptation, something special is created that nobody will ever see coming. Among all the anime that came out this year, Dandadan was definitely the one that was on everyone's radar. You have the studio famously known for Devilman, and more recently Scott Pilgrim tackling a story that at first glance can come off as absolutely wacky. The author Yukinobu Tatsu, being a former editor of Fujimoto, also added a little flair to the conversation as people couldn't help but wonder what this story was gonna be about. Little did they know that they were signing themselves up for a long hunt for a guy's balls. It goes without saying that you would most likely sound insane for trying to describe this series to somebody who's never heard of it, and that's kind of the fun part about such unpredictable stories. It's truly something that people have to witness for themselves, and across this season, Dandadan has had a lot of different aspects that have appealed to the masses. On one hand, there's a crowd that absolutely enjoys the nerdy romantic build-up between Okarun and Momo, and in another direction, there's a crowd that absolutely loves the action that comes with each encounter of both the spiritual and the supernatural. Can't forget to mention that there's an audience that genuinely enjoys discussing the production of the show and how almost every week there is some form of eye candy brought on in various ways. Of course, if you're like me, then I'm sure you're engaging in big back activities, absolutely feasting from just about every little thing this story has to offer. It's not often that we get a combination of aliens and spirits to push forward the major conflicts of the story, and with everything else weaved in between, you're gonna be in for a good time. Though, if somebody were to ask you, what is Dandadan's heartbeat, well, what would you say? I don't think a lot of people would say the fights, as even though there is plenty of action, the series is more than just fights, and quite frankly, there are other stories to satiate that overall desire. For the first 6 episodes, a lot of people would probably have said its unpredictable nature, which though obvious, is pretty reasonable from what we've seen thus far. However, the most important thing I've learned over these past couple of years is to never think that you have a story fully figured out off the bat just because you have a strong impression of the story's direction. Week after week, I saw the same adjectives being used to describe this series. Silly, wacky, epic, cute, insane, but you know, like all good meals, you tend to save the best thing for last. The one thing I gotta give Yukinobu credit for is how he throws his punches. He'll give you something cool, he'll give you something epic, he'll give you something so ridiculous that you can't help but laugh out loud, and right when you think you've seen it all, the last punch ends up being the most devastating. As I've been doing my rounds watching reactors view episode 7, the one thing they have in common is that they all did not expect the series to deliver such an emotional gut punch after everything they've seen thus far. Some even saying that this series has no right, obviously, a humorous post-reaction thought given their devastated emotions, but on the contrary, the series absolutely does. The story of acrobatic Silky, or rather the mother she was before she became a vengeful spirit, was a roller coaster of emotions. A mother doing what she must in the face of darker circumstances to survive, but her survival isn't just her own, as her daughter is what really kept her going. You know, I've seen some takes talking about how there was a lack of build-up before this backstory, and my reply is yeah, no shit. The way the story was delivered allowed us to be overwhelmed with emotion, and it was adapted beautifully. Not everything needs to be spoon-fed to the audience beforehand. In the moment storytelling very much still exists, and for more than half the episode, we saw everything we needed to both the good and the ugly. In a mere few minutes, we saw the lifetime of a mom that worked her butt off to ensure her daughter could smile, the time they spent together, the ballet they practiced, the birthdays as the young girl grew up, and it gave you a sense that despite everything not being ideal or fair, they're making it work. Parental love is a beautiful thing that should never be taken for granted, because in a blink of an eye, all of it could disappear, and that's exactly what we watched transpire. One costly decision was all it took for things to go south, and we found ourselves watching an ugly situation as a child being separated from their mother being taken into God knows what type of hell. Pulling us back into the POV we saw at the beginning of the episode as that mother tried to race after her child, but her injuries claiming hold of her strength first. We don't know the exact details as to what happened to that child, but what we do know is what became of the mother. There aren't enough words to describe the anguish she was feeling, and on that fateful night, it consumed her whole. There are plenty of cultures that have stories about spirits and the tragedies that bound them to this earth unable to rest, and like Turbo Granny, Silky had her own story to tell. It's taken a bit further when we see how it connects to Ira, also being separated from her mother at a young age as well, and with the concept of children having greater awareness in their innocent years, the two were briefly able to meet long ago. A mother separated from her child and a child separated from her mother. You can see where the emotional connection comes from. It's sad, and despite everything that took place beforehand, what ended this story wasn't violence or revenge, but empathy for two people who shared a common grief. Ira summoning the courage to do the one thing she could do to allow Silky to rest. She could never replace the original daughter, but if there was something that would allow Silky to pass on and reunite with her, then stepping up to the task is a beautiful final call. Even as a manga reader knowing what was coming, I found myself in tears by the end of the episode, and I'm not the only one. The reactions were pretty similar across the board, and you best believe that the reactor community had a long day. Whether you are a mother or parent, lost your own in these past few years, or are just grateful for everything a motherly figure has done for you, this episode was going to make sure to speak to that part of your heart by the end of it. It is here that I realized that one of the main reasons I'm on board for this series is to watch these characters connect. Connecting with somebody can span across many ideas. Maybe it's as simple as sharing a common interest, or displaying a shred of kindness to one another, or even finding somebody to share that burden with you. It just so happens that Dandadan has some crazy build-up to reach those points, but when you get to them, you find yourself destroyed emotionally time and time again. I remember back in episode 1 that people were surprised how hard Okarun was going to protect Momo just because she stood up for him. Comments like, that's all it took, and yeah, sometimes a little bit of kindness towards those who are constantly shunned by their environment is all it takes to pull somebody away from negative thoughts. Imagine if nobody stuck up for him and he was hit with that magnet. Could anybody blame him for what he could have turned into after dealing with loneliness for years? The minute Momo sat down, a connection was formed. Whether it's the two factions, the banter, the awkward feelings, the fights, all of it serve as a meaning to gradually connect as it builds towards the crucial emotional point where someone else needs to be understood, and that, in my opinion, is the heartbeat of Dandadan. It's a heartbeat that has gotten louder and louder as the story has progressed and introduced new characters, whether humans, aliens, or spirits. All of them have a story to tell, and each one tends to hit just as hard, if not harder, than the last. Momo and the love for her grandmother, Okarun and his loneliness, Gigi and the evil eye, Mr. Mantis and his son's illness, Kinta's insecurities, Famola's absolutely heartbreaking survival story from war, Ren's regrets, Zuma's fight to live. Each of these characters have a past that may not be so pretty, but deserves to be heard, and one by one you become emotionally invested in them. It's not like a lot of what we see either isn't real, as the more human struggles tend to be what allow people to empathize. By the time the dust settles, there's room for a new connection to be established, which typically happens at the dinner table. These characters all have had their struggles, their nightmares, the days when they thought certain things weren't fair, moments where they wish they could have gone back and done things differently, and it binds them together towards a hopeful future. Acrobatic Silky's story was the tip of the iceberg, but it clearly was executed well enough to prove that Yukinobu truly has something special going on here for the long term. It makes you wonder, how many more characters will we meet? How many more stories need to be told? And when we arrive at the end someday, what will the result of the bonds affected by spirits and aliens look like with this crew of people connected through it? As I always try to state when talking about a new series, especially shonen, I don't need Dandadan to be something revolutionary. It has long captivated me without the need to do so, and I hope people manage to appreciate this story without trying to push it up as this next big thing when it doesn't necessarily need to be. At this point, I think people know what they can expect going forward, and I think that as far as first impressions of the emotional weight the story can carry, it's had an excellent display so far. I know I cannot control opinions at large, but I do hope people try to not downplay this story for being just dumb fun, because it's clearly shown itself to be more than simply that. The reception speaks for itself, as episode 7 has deeply connected with the audience, and as I always say, in the eyes of the consumer, the only thing that matters is the result. Though this time around, how we felt walking away from this episode was just as powerful as the presentation itself. With that, ladies and gentlemen, will bring me to the end of this video. As always, thank you for watching, and please make sure to let me know all your thoughts about today's video in the comment section down below. Be well out there until we meet again in the next video.